So many of you know that I work at a hospital as my real job. Well, the other day, some of my coworkers and I were discussing hobbies, and my watch repair hobby and this channel came up. One of the people who works in hospitality, a real sweet lady named Lisa, told me about a pocket watch that she has that used to belong to her grandfather. She asked if I could take a look at it and see if I could get it running like she remembered. I said, of course, and here it is. So the first thing I want to do is to see if the MotionWorks is working, and I'll just pull out on the pendant. And yeah, everything looks to be in order there. And I'll try to wind the watch. And it does wind. However, the seconds hand is not working. So we know we've got some kind of an issue inside. Now this looks to be about a size 12, and as you've seen, it is an Elgin. And once we get the back off, we'll be able to tell a little bit more about what's going on with this watch. And I always get a little nervous at this point because just like Forrest Gump's mama used to say, you never know what you're going to get. And this doesn't look too... Oh, look at this! We have got an inscription here. This is a nice surprise. I don't think Lisa knows about this. It says, awarded by CNEB 4-H Cotton Club Champion of Lone Oak County, Arkansas, 1929. So she was right on with the date. That is awesome. And as you could also see, there was some little scratches inside the case, and those are done by other watchmakers when they service the watch. So we know that this watch has been serviced before based on those markings. And we take a look in here, and it is 15 joules, so we know that it is a high quality movement. There's a little bit of corrosion on the ratchet wheel, but I'm not too concerned about that. Everything else looks really in pretty good shape. So I'll just blow some air over the balance wheel, and yeah, we can tell that there's a broken balance staff. So we know that we have that to contend with, so far anyway. So first things first, I'll need to remove the hands and get this movement out of the case. Gosh, that inscription has me really pumped about this watch. This is just another instance of one of these pocket watches being like a little time capsule, taking us back to a time where the original owner received the watch. And I remember that Lisa told me that her grandfather was born in 1919, so he would have been 10 years old when he presumably won this watch for being a champion. I'm going to do some research into what the Cotton Club was, and I'll report back towards the end of this video with what I find out. So stay tuned for that. Now here I'm using some hand remover levers, and I need to give a shout out to one of my subscribers, a guy named Spiffy Devo. And not only are these very, very well made, but they're also very beautiful. And he made these by hand and sent them to me. And once again, Spiffy Devo, thank you very much. That was a wonderful gift. So I'm going to remove the hands and keep them in this little membrane box just for safekeeping. I really love the blue on these hands. They are gorgeous. You can also tell that the dial is in really pretty good shape, maybe just a little dirty. But I want to preserve as much of the original look of this watch as I can. I want it to look just like it did when Lisa's grandfather would get it out of his pocket and look at it. I want her to remember that just the way it is. So I'm not going to be doing a major cleaning or anything like that. Maybe just clean this crystal or just replace it. I think that would make it look pretty amazing. And usually these dials are just held in with a few screws. And once these are loosened, the dial just comes right off. And I'll also place that in its own special little holder, just to keep that safe also. So that little piece right there that I removed, that's called the hour wheel. And I took that off of a little part called the cannon pinion. And we'll be removing that later. But the first thing I need to do is to get this in a movement holder. And then we need to let down the mainspring. Now the mainspring is what provides the power to the watch. There are no batteries in these watches. These are all self-contained little machines, and they run off of spring power, and the mainspring is what provides that power. So once I let down the mainspring, or in other words, get all the spring tension out of the watch, it's safe to remove all the other parts. And the first part I want to remove is the balance assembly, just because it has a very delicate part attached to it, and that part is called the hairspring. It's that very thin blue coil you can see jumping around there. If that coil gets bent out of shape, even just in the slightest amount, it will affect how well the watch runs. Here's something to take note of. You may have noticed that it looks like I'm turning this screw in the wrong direction. Well, that's because the crown wheel screw is almost always a reverse threaded screw. It's made like that because of the way the crown wheel moves. It would cause a normal screw to unscrew itself over time. If I were to try to remove that screw normally, I would almost certainly break the head off of that screw, and then I'd have a whole other problem on my hands. So if you're new to my channel or new to watchmaking or watch repair in general, we do something here that is pretty unique in the world of repair. We're actually going to take apart every single piece of this watch, clean it, look at it, make sure that it is serviceable, and then put everything back together with proper lubrication, and hopefully we'll have a working watch again. Obviously, they would never do this to fix your car. They wouldn't take every single piece apart of your car and put it back together, or your refrigerator, or your dishwasher, or your computer. They're just going to fix the broken piece, so to speak. But in watchmaking or watch repair, these watches were actually made to be taken apart, cleaned meticulously, and then reassembled. So that large plate that I just took off is called the barrel bridge. And with it removed, we can see part of the keyless works and the mainspring barrel, which is that large round brass piece you see there. That is where the mainspring is housed. So as I continue with the disassembly of this movement, I'd like to talk a bit about the maker of this watch, Elgin National Watch Company. Elgin National Watch Company started life in 1864 in Chicago, Illinois. At the time, it was called the National Watch Company, and it was basically just an idea with no factory to speak of. A month later, the founders visited the Waltham Watch Company, which was an established watchmaker in Massachusetts. While there, they convinced 7 of Waltham's watchmakers to come work for their newly founded company. As they began looking for a spot to build their factory, they visited a small town 30 miles outside of Chicago called, you guessed it, Elgin, Illinois. The founders convinced the city to donate 35 acres for the site of the new watch factory. They broke ground in April of 1865, and in 1866 the factory was open for business. The company renamed itself the Elgin National Watch Company, and in 1867 produced its very first original pocket watch movement called the B.W. Raymond, in honor of one of the company's original founders. From that date in 1867 up until 1964, Elgin produced half of the total number of pocket watches manufactured in the United States, which is a huge amount. In 1968, the company closed its stores forever, selling the rights to the Elgin name. So getting back to the disassembly, I've gotten almost all of the parts taken off this side of the movement. I'm taking off the pallet cock, and here we see a good example of why mechanical watches need to be serviced every 5 to 7 years. Maybe you can get away with 10 years. This is the pallet fork, and its pivot is actually stuck inside the jewel of the pallet cock. During a watch service, the watchmaker will apply specialized oils and greases of varying thicknesses and viscosities to help lubricate the moving parts and reduce friction. But after so many years, these oils will begin to break down and will actually start to act almost like a glue. In extreme cases, it can get so bad that it could actually stop a watch from running. Also, with the lubricating properties of the oil gone, even if the watch continues to run, friction can start to wear down pivots and damage the watch over time. The last parts to remove from the movement are parts from the keyless and motion works. I'm just going to quickly remove these parts for now because there are several parts to this, but I'm going to discuss it in greater detail later because it has a very particular function that I find really interesting. But I'll come back to that when I reassemble this portion of the movement. And the final 2 tiny little screws belong to what's called the minute wheel clamp. This is basically just a little plate which holds the minute wheel in place. I'll be giving this watch back to Lisa at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Now what I want to do is to visually inspect all the jewels and the bearing holes to make sure that there are no chips, cracks, or broken jewels, because even a tiny chip can affect how the watch will run. These little jewels are actually lab-produced sapphires, which have a hardness of just below that of diamonds. And while they don't have the value of actual sapphires, they do provide the perfect surface for the pivots of the watch wheels to ride in. So now we have to deal with that broken balance staff. The staff is the part of the balance wheel which has the little pivots at the end. The balance wheel is attached to the hairspring, which is attached to the balance cock by a little piece called the hairspring stud. So to remove the balance wheel and the hairspring together, All I have to do is loosen this little screw, and I can separate the balance wheel from the balance cock. So under the microscope, you can see where there is no longer a pivot on this side of the balance staff. I'll turn it over and show the other side. And you can see a nicely intact pivot. So cleaning the parts of a watch is a pretty straightforward operation. There are several options, from cleaning by hand using various chemicals like lighter fluid, isopropyl alcohol, or benzene, or you can use a cleaning machine and commercial cleaning chemicals. Last year I acquired a vintage watch cleaning machine, and that was in pretty bad condition, but I restored it back to the way it should be. And by the way, I did make a video about that. If you're interested in seeing that, I'll leave a link in the description below. So now all I have to do is load all the parts into these little mesh baskets and attach the main basket to the rotating end of the cleaning machine. It's not a totally automated process, but seeing that this machine was probably made back in the 1940s, it does a pretty efficient job of cleaning all these parts. It goes through one cleaning stage for about 7 minutes and then 2 rinsing stages. The chemicals do a really nice job of removing all the dirt and grime and old lubricants, and they even brighten the metal parts, making everything look nice and shiny again. And I just love that. One thing the cleaning machine won't completely clean are the jewels with capstones. An example of that would be the jewels on top of the balance cock. And since the balance has already been removed from this one, I thought I'd show you how I clean and lubricate this area by hand. So as I already mentioned, these jewels have capstones that are basically just flat jewels that have no hole through them. After removing the screws from the top of the cock, I use a tweezers to remove the capstone. I clean it by first soaking it in a little lighter fluid. It's also called naphtha. And I also use a bit of pegwood to rub the stone clean. And then I rinse it again. I clean the whole jewel the same way. Once the jewels are dry, I add a single small drop of lubricant. In this case, I'm using Mobius 9010. I add that to the cap jewel and then position it on top of the whole jewel and screw it back into place. So here are all the parts that make up the watch. The internal parts have all gone through the parts cleaner and are almost ready to be reassembled. When it's all laid out like this, it really doesn't look like that many parts, does it? Remember I said almost ready to be reassembled? There's one more thing I like to do as part of the cleaning process, and that involves cleaning the individual pivots on each of the wheels. What you may think of as gears, watchmakers call these wheels. So for this, I use a special product called an E-Flex pin polisher. These little silicone rubber polishing sticks come in all sorts of sizes and grits. Here I'm using the fine grit. I just mounted it in a pin vise, and I'll just treat each one of the pivots with a few twists against the grit. I'm not actually polishing the pivots. There's an entirely separate machine used for that. I'm basically just cleaning the pivots really, really well. Then instead of rinsing them off, I just push them into some Rodico, which is basically very sticky Play-Doh. One of its nicknames is actually Watchmaker's Play-Doh. It's really handy stuff, and you'll see me using it throughout this video for various things. So here's the new balance wheel that I ordered, and as you can see, it has both of its pivots, and I'll clean those also with this E-Flex stick. Now that all the parts to the movement are clean, I'll start the reassembly. When you see me using an oiler to add lubricants to the particular parts, I'll make sure to note the part name and which oiler or grease I'm using at the bottom of the screen. That way, if I go off on a tangent about something, you'll see the name of the part and the oil anyway. I'm adding the train of wheels, beginning with the escape wheel, then the third wheel, and then the fourth wheel. The mainspring barrel goes in next, and this is where I made a mistake. I can't find the footage that I shot of cleaning and replacing the mainspring. Just know that it was in good shape, so I did not replace the mainspring. I just cleaned and lubricated the original and installed it back into the barrel. These are the parts of the keyless works. They consist of the winding arbor, the sliding clutch, the winding pinion, and the arbor winding sleeve. You'll also notice that I used a blue grease. It is thicker and is designed for metal-to-metal contact. The center wheel is next, and I add just a bit of the Mobius 1300 to the top of the center staff. With the wheels in place, they are all held in position with the barrel bridge. This can be a bit tricky to get the 4 pivots from the wheels and the mainspring barrel lined up with the jewel holes on the bridge. It takes a bit of patience, but in this case, they all lined up without any problems. Looks like I got pretty lucky here. It's really important to make sure that all the pivots are in the jewel holes before tightening the screws, or the pivots could break. Next is the train wheel bridge, and the same goes for this part. This bridge is a bit easier because there are only 2 pivots to line up here. I give the wheels a little turn, and you can see that everything spins without any resistance, and that is a very good sign. You know, earlier when I was talking about how Elgin produced half of all the pocket watches produced in the United States, just to give you some idea of how many that was, this particular movement is called the Grade 315. It's only one of several grades of pocket watch movement made by Elgin. This movement was very popular though, and there were 329 total production runs of this movement made between 1904 and 1940. That accounts for around 1,033,900 total movements. And that is just for this grade. I find that incredible. I've seen research that says that Elgin produced between 55 and 60 million pocket watches total over its 100 years in business. Let that sink in for a minute. So with the ratchet wheel in place, I can install the click spring and the click. Basically, the click spring will hold tension on the click, making sure that the ratchet wheel does not unwind, releasing all the built-up mainspring power. Incidentally, the clicking noise you hear when winding a watch is the click tapping against each tooth of the ratchet wheel as it turns. I'll add a bit of HP 1300 before I set the crown wheel into place. Then I'll add just a little bit more before I place the crown wheel core inside the crown wheel. Then I secure both of them down to the barrel bridge. Remember, this is that reverse threaded screw. It's not a big deal if you get confused while you're trying to screw it back in. If you forget at this point, you'll just be unscrewing it over and over again. You'll eventually figure it out. Just ask me how I know. Now I'll just flip the movement over to the dial side and add the motion and keyless works. First, I'll take care of the minute wheel and that cool little minute wheel clamp with those 2 tiny screws. And now I'd like to talk a bit about these parts for a minute. If you're familiar with pocket watches, you may have noticed that these few parts look a little different than some that you might see on other brands of pocket watch. They're there for a specific reason, and it has to do with servicing the watch. This watch is actually pendant set and wind, so it's normally in setting mode unless the stem is pushed in. This lever allows us to put the watch into winding mode when out of the case. So for example, when we're working on the movement, the winding/setting clutch is disengaged and the watch doesn't have to work against all that friction. And this is the spring that provides the power to connect that lever to the rest of the motion works. A little lubrication on the center wheel pivot and the cannon pinion can be put in place. Just be careful here when you press it down that the teeth of the cannon pinion mesh with those of the minute wheel beneath it. Another option would be to install the cannon pinion before adding the minute wheel and clamp. I can turn the movement back over to the watchmaker's side and position the pallet fork into its jewel. Then I'll just hold it in place with the pallet cock. No lubrication is usually used on these jewels. Now once the pallet fork is in place and moving freely, I need to put some wind in the watch. Just a few winds will do. I'm checking to make sure that the mainspring is holding the tension that I'm putting into it. I'm looking and listening for anything out of the ordinary. It should be smooth and easy, and it is. Now I want to check to make sure that the pallet fork jumps back and forth with just the slightest nudge of my tweezers. And that looks great too. Now I need to lubricate the end stones and the escape wheel teeth. I use Mobius 9415 and a small broaching tool to add just the slightest amount to the end stone. So we're getting really close now. I just need to attach the new donor balance wheel and hairspring to the balance cock and then I can try installing the balance into the movement and see if it'll run. I always get a little bit nervous or anxious right about now. I want to see the hairspring breathing, hear the beating of its heart again, and hopefully, if I've done everything right so far, I'm just a few moments away from that feeling right now. Oh, there it goes. It's a little weak, but it's there. It's going to stop now, but that's okay. I just need to get the cock seated properly and get it screwed down a little, and it should start up again. Just a little puff of air, and there it goes. Stronger this time. Now, once I can tell that it's sitting in there properly, then I can tighten down the screw. Now I'll just give it more power, and there it is. That looks really nice. It just needs some lubrication now. So let's put it on the time grapher and see how it's doing. Biggest problem right now is the 5 milliseconds of beat error. Well, what is beat error? Well, what is beat? Beat is the tick-tock of the watch. Each time it ticks, it takes a certain amount of time until it talks. The ticks and the talks should be occurring at the same interval. When they're not, you get a tick-tock, tick-tock. That's exaggerated, of course, but that difference in time, that's the beat error. So how do we fix the beat error? Well, it's just a matter of moving the hairspring in relation to the balance wheel. That's right, I said the hairspring. We have to mess around with the most delicate part of the watch. So the hairspring is held onto the balance staff with a collet. There is a slit in that collet, and I can fit a tiny screwdriver into it and turn it slightly. So I need to be extremely careful not to slip. So it looks like I've got the beat error down to 1.3 milliseconds, and I can live with that. Next is the rate, and that is how fast or slow the watch is running. We are about 25 seconds fast here. There's a much easier way to adjust the rate, and that's by turning this screw on top of the watch called the regulator. So with the movement all serviced and running pretty well, I want to spend some time cleaning the watch case and taking a look at this crystal. This crystal and bezel are pretty dirty and has been well loved, and while I appreciate that, this watch truly deserves a new one. I'll spend a minute scraping off some of the grit and grime with some pegwood. Then I want to measure both the interior width of the bezel as well as the outer diameter of the crystal itself. I'll use these measurements to order a brand new crystal. Now I want to look at this case. Again, there's some dirt and grime, and that just happens on items that are almost 100 years old. I'll take some pegwood and just gently scrape away what I can before I give everything a gentle bath in the ultrasonic cleaner. So after a nice soak, everything looks really nice. Now I'm not going to polish anything at all. I think it looks really good just the way it is. Now I've been thinking about a way that I can help Lisa to display the inscription while also providing her with a display back for the movement. More about that a little later. First, I want to clean up this dial a bit. I want to be as gentle as I can be. And to do that, I think I'll just be using some Rodico to gently rub the surface of the dial to help remove just some of the loose dirt and dust. I don't want to risk damaging the dial in any way. I may also use a little bit of pegwood around the numbers to remove some of the dirt buildup in those creases. And I think that's all it needs. I love it. So let's put it all together. I'll start with the hour wheel, and then add the dial. Tighten the dial screws. I'll place the movement in the case. And replace the case screws. Then I'll carefully add the hands. And align them properly. That blue and gold against that cream colored dial is just stunning. Then I'll make sure that the hands clear each other. The new crystal came in, so I want to press that into place with my crystal press. I have an entire video about this if anyone has any questions about how it's done. And I'll leave a link in the description below. So if you're enjoying what I'm doing on this channel, please like and subscribe. It means so much to me and also helps others to find my videos. And if you'd like to show your appreciation maybe just a little bit more, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com/watchasilearn, all one word, and leave a little donation for me for a coffee or a soda or maybe even a beer. All of your support means so much to me. But now, let's get back to the big reveal. Also, I want to show you what I did. I found an exact copy of the Wadsworth case that was on this watch in an antique store in Fort Worth, Texas. I took the front bezel off and replaced the crystal, and then I screwed it onto the back of this case, and it fits perfectly. Now Lisa can display the inscription inside the back of the cover, and she can also see the watch running through this display back. Watch now as I return the watch to her in its current condition.
What do you got?
Thank you again for coming along. I hope you had fun watching.
You got it done?
Yep.
Wow. That looks awesome.
Yeah, check it out. So I was able to find a exact back piece.
How awesome is that?
So that way you can see the movement, and you can also display the back with the inscription.
Oh.
I thought it was just kind of a shame that it was hidden inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, if you want it back to the original way, you just have to screw the back off.
No,
and you
I
can
think
screw that one back on.
That's awesome. Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Wow.
Now, does seeing that watch, does that spark any memories
Oh,
of
yeah.
your grandfather?
Yep, he carried this with him all the time. He just took us to the lake all the time, and he always kept his pocket watch in his, he'd keep it in his shirt pocket, and anytime anybody had asked what time it was, he'd just, he'd pull it out, but he'd pull it out many times and look at it, but he had the chain, but the chain, was...
Right.
Was
now, did you have any idea?
I did not. Mm-mm. I didn't know there was an inscription on that, and I'd never heard.
1929.
Yeah.
You said he would have been 10 years old.
He was 10 years old. Yeah. He was born in 1919.
So I looked that up, and the 4-H had a thing called the Cotton Club, and they would, between 10 and 12 years old, they would give you an acre. Well, they wouldn't give you an acre, but you would have an acre of cotton that you would have to raise, and then they would judge who had the best cotton.
Oh.
And that's what I believe that means.
Yeah,
It
makes
was the
sense.
Cotton Club champion.
Yeah.
So he would have won that
Yes.
when he was 10 years old, and he's had that ever since.
Yeah.
So it must have been a prized possession of his, obviously.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure it was. And Arkansas is where, he was born and lived there most of his life. He ended up coming to Oklahoma, but.
But the inscription makes sense.
Yes,
because
yes.
that's where he's from.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah.
When I took that back off and I saw that inscription, I was like, it was like finding a little lost treasure. I was like, this is so cool. And I wasn't sure if you knew about it or not.
I didn't know whenever you sent those pictures. It was just, I didn't know. I had no idea. Golly, Mark, this is awesome.
I hope you didn't mind that I kind of took
No,
that.
I love that.
I think the movement is so beautiful.
It is.
Anyway.
Just watching it going.
And it cleaned up really well. It looked really. Now you also told me that he was a World War II veteran.
Yes.
And you said something about
General Patton. Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot other than
Right.
he just told us that he worked really close with General Patton, like he was right beside him, protected him constantly, just in the war. He was on a tank, an army tank.
Oh, really?
And then he had a grenade that blew up I can't remember which ear it was, but blew up really close to him, and he lost most of his hearing in that ear. So when he'd talk to you, he'd always kind of lean up and say, "Tell me in my good ear,"
Right.
But he didn't talk about the war a lot because he always felt like he had, he fought enough in the war that nobody in the family should have had to fight in the war. No, he wouldn't talk about it. And if other family members that he fought in war with two of my grandma's cousins, and he would not talk about the war at all. He was just so opposed, like if they'd get to talking about it, he'd eventually kind of just shut it down, especially if there was women or children around. He didn't think it was appropriate to talk about it.
Right.
He was my favorite
That's
guy.
awesome. Well, I really appreciate, it's a family heirloom and it's very treasured to you, and I appreciate you allowing me to do a service on this watch. It really was a pleasure. I really did enjoy it, and I think it came out just
God, I
really,
love
really
it.
wonderful.
It did. You did an amazing job on it. It looks so good.
No, thanks.
No, thank you, Mark.
You
I
think
mean,
about it, and you know, at 1929, that was a long time ago, and for these things to be keeping as good a time as they still do, I mean, they were really built to last.
Yeah.
And anyway, like I said, I really did have a great time.
Yeah, it's just got a lot of I mean, it does. It's I mean, my aunt offered it to me, and I mean, of course I'm going to take it, you know. It's something to remember my grandpa by.
Right.
You know, and I mean, I have some other old items, you know, that my grandparents gave me whenever they were alive that, I mean, they probably don't mean anything to anybody else, but to me they do.
Well, this is something that he had next to him every day, I would imagine.
Yep.
So
He'd pick us up the last day of school every year. He'd be at school picking me and my brother and my sister up, and he would, he never failed us, you know. We'd go to their house, stay the night, get up the next morning, drive to Greenleaf State Park, spend, you know, they spent all summer there, but we'd spend, you know, a couple of weeks at a time, come home for a little bit, then go back.
Right.
But that was our every summer, just a lot of memories with them and that watch. So, but
Very
yeah, I never
cool.
knew. I mean, I appreciate you taking it, and
you bet.
never even thought to go and have someone, you know, it's been literally sitting in I have a shelf, it's called a secretary, but it's got 2 glass doors on it, and I keep it on the glass shelf, just sitting there on top of a little cloth.
How cool. Well,
Now it's working.
yeah, now it's working.
Yep.
It's working great. There was one of the sides of the balance was broken.
Okay.
And then I replaced the crystal, and and then I just cleaned it, and that's really all I had to do to it. So
Till I see you next time.
Yep.
Stay safe
All right.
and God bless.